Former Hong Kong marathon winner disappointed by cancelled event this year. Health Secretary rejects comparing COVID with flu. China's Shenzhou 14 spacecraft conducted second extravehicular activities. Good evening and welcome. This year's Hong Kong Marathon has been cancelled, but there are still runners hoping the organisers can postpone the event instead of calling it off. Meanwhile, Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan found the organisers' decision to call off the event surprising and regrettable. Caleb Leung has details.
This is Wong Kai-lok, the men's champion of the 2021 Hong Kong Marathon. Determined to defend his crown, Wong has been preparing for around 3 months for this year's competition, including a self-paid trip to Australia for training. But all his efforts went down the drain when the Hong Kong Association of Athletics Affiliates, or HKAAA, announced the cancellation of the event. Wong is hoping the government can discuss with the HKAAA about whether the race could be postponed instead of called off. Meanwhile, Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan found it both surprising and regrettable that this year's Hong Kong Marathon has been cancelled. Chan said the HKAAA only submitted its formal application last week, and the government needs time to consider it. The government is actively processing the application, according to Chan, and has not banned the event. But as the competition involves more than 10,000 people who would be taking off their masks, Chan said the government requires some time to process the application. Chan added that the government strongly welcomes major events, such as international competitions, being held in Hong Kong. But this will be based on the premise that they would not bring an additional burden to the city's healthcare system or cause an increase in COVID-related deaths. While the Hong Kong Marathon is cancelled, the Singapore Marathon will return as a full-scale event in December, with up to 50,000 participants expected to compete. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
The 2023 World Dragon Boat Racing Championships, which is set to be held in Hong Kong next August, have been moved to Pattaya, Thailand, due to the city's anti-COVID rules. The International Dragon Boat Federation today released a statement saying they had agreed to move the contest to Thailand, citing the city's quarantine requirements for inbound travelers. The Hong Kong-China Dragon Boat Association expressed regret. The next event will be held in Germany in 2025. The chairman of the group said they will continue to strive to host the 2027 championships. The city logged 8,278 new COVID infections, a slight drop from yesterday. It's the 6th consecutive day that Hong Kong's daily caseload has been below the 9,000 mark. In their daily pandemic briefing, health authorities said they didn't see a drastic increase in infection numbers after the Mid-Autumn Festival, but they reiterated that they still need a longer time to assess whether the city's pandemic situation has hit a plateau. Christy Khan has details.
Hong Kong's daily COVID infection tally has hovered between 7,000 and 9,000 in the past few days. In their daily pandemic briefing, health officials said that so far there was no sign that the infection tally had recorded a drastic increase after the long holiday last week. As to whether the city's pandemic situation has plateaued, health authorities said that they still need a few more days to observe and assess the matter. Additionally, they also emphasized that there are differences between COVID and flu.
We should be mindful of the fact that flu is an endemic that has been with us for a long time. It's a common disease, it's a seasonal thing. And for COVID, it's something new. It's still in the pandemic form. Comparing COVID with the flu, the local data shows that the fatality rate is higher for COVID.
Despite COVID having a higher fatality rate than flu, there has been a drop in coronavirus-related deaths in the city since the start of the year. Health authorities added this can be attributed to 3 factors.
In Hong Kong, vaccination rate has gone up Now we also have oral antivirals for COVID. We also have other control measures, infection control measures for close contact at care homes. They will also be sent to quarantine centers so that they are monitored.
Meanwhile, 16 additional COVID-related deaths were reported, including the 4-year-old boy whose death was announced yesterday. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Secretary for Health said the administration is considering to further loosen quarantine measures for new arrivals in the city. That includes ending the mandatory hotel quarantine period. However, no set schedule has been made for the potential changes. Meanwhile, the health chief emphasized that those who regard the pandemic as a common flu will mislead the public. Timothy Lee has more.
Earlier this week, Dr. Leung Pak-yin, a former chief executive of the hospital authority, said the death rate of the coronavirus is similar to that of the common flu. Leung also criticized unnamed individuals for preventing the city from returning to normalcy. However, Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mao disagreed, pointing out that many who do not work on the front line of the healthcare sector fail to realize the pressure staff face.
Fatality rate is not the only measure that our policy depends on. The most important one is the pressure that our public healthcare system faces during this pandemic. Every day, more than 350 COVID patients are admitted to our public healthcare system, and there are nearly 2,800 COVID patients in our healthcare system. Now, for those who have not been in the hospital, they may not appreciate that, but if you need the healthcare system, then your health will be affected.
The health chief said the effects of COVID-19 could not be placed on equal footing with the common flu, pointing out that the pandemic has already claimed the lives of 8 children below the age of 11 this year, while child fatalities from the flu average at 3 annually. Low added public hospitals have recently cut healthcare services by 40%. While the city is currently following a 3+4 hotel quarantine measure for new arrivals, the Secretary for Health said the government is considering a 0+7 arrangement, which would abandon the hotel quarantine period, requiring just 7 days of medical surveillance. But there is no timetable for such arrangement yet. He noted that the administration prioritizes restoring international flight connections, but has not decided on when the new measures will be implemented. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The U.S. Department of Defense has made administrative changes in how it handles Taiwan policy. The move involves placing the Taiwan portfolio under the office responsible for the policy on the mainland. The U.S. Department of Defense says the move is a bureaucratic change designed to increase internal efficiency within the agency's policy shop. However, some U.S. lawmakers and former officials say the change sends the wrong signal to Beijing, with U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan noting that anything that dilutes America's focus on helping Taiwan to defend itself is a really bad idea. Crew members of Shenzhou 14 spacecraft successfully conducted their second extravehicular activities, also known as EVAs, today. Taikonaut Cai Shuzhe could be seen emerging from the Wentian laboratory cabin module of the space station to perform a spacewalk. CCTV reported the EVA lasted for 6 hours, during which time the crew installed a foot stop and an assist handle to help the taikonauts with future operations. One of the most significant achievements of today's EVA was the challenging task of conducting the first extravehicular rescue. The crew of Shenzhou 14 performed their first EVA on the 2nd of this month, with mainland authorities citing the need to normalize EVAs as essential for manning the Tiangong space station. Still ahead on tonight's news, government vows to take action over trees after yesterday's accident. Vice Premier Wang Qishan will attend Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Welcome back. Yesterday, a large flamboyant tree toppled and crashed into several cars in Ho Man Tin. Responding to the incident today, Secretary for Development Bernadette Lin has requested 9 departments tasked with tree management to inspect all of the city's flamboyant trees. A new task force has also been set up to re-examine the current inspection and management of trees. Timothy Lee reports.
This 9.5-meter tall tree, known either as a flamboyant tree or Delonyx regia, fell onto 4 vehicles, including a school bus, on Homenton's Perth Street yesterday morning. 4 cars were crushed, while the driver of the school bus suffered scratches to his arms. Secretary for Development Bernadette Lin said the government is very concerned about the accident and has already requested the Leisure and Cultural Services Department to inspect the trees planted on Perth Street. Lin has also asked 9 departments related to tree management to inspect more than 10,000 flamboyant trees across Hong Kong, and she expects a report by the beginning of next month. She added that the Development Bureau will establish a task force under the leadership of a permanent secretary to examine the current tree management work. That includes inspecting the various departments' methods of management and execution. The Secretary for Development also said the community should consider whether some very old trees are still suitable to be located in certain places that have modernized over the years, and considerations should be more about saving trees rather than cutting them down. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The government has hired independent experts to help investigate the cause of the fatal industrial incident in Samuelping, where a tower crane collapsed. The incident happened last week at a construction site where a tower crane fell onto shipping containers, killing 3 people and injuring another 6. Secretary for Labour and Welfare Chris Swin said the investigation would require time to seek out the cause. He said the government has hired independent experts to help with this investigation. Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan will attend Queen Elizabeth's funeral on Monday. Meanwhile, in Britain, people wishing to join the queue to file past Queen Elizabeth's coffin, which is laying in state at Westminster Hall, can expect a 24-hour wait. Last night, King Charles and his siblings stood vigil around their mother's coffin, and the Queen's grandchildren are expected to stood vigil today. Tracy Furness reports.
King Charles III stood vigil at his mother's coffin in Westminster Hall for 15 minutes Friday night, together with Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. Mourners respectfully kept silent as they streamed into Westminster Hall, even as the King and his 3 siblings stood vigil around the flag-draped coffin. The queue stretched 8 kilometres on Friday with people from all walks of life, including former England football captain David Beckham, who received an OBE from the Queen for services to football.
We were all here. This is not safe, excuse me. Her Majesty today, and I think, it didn't matter how long we were there. We were there for a reason, and everyone was together, and it was a special few hours. Saying our goodbyes.
Yeah. What went through your mind when you were stood there next to the coffin? It's quite a moment, isn't it?
It's hard to explain. It's very emotional, and the silence and the feeling in the room is very hard to explain. But I said, we're all there saying thanks to Her Majesty for being kind, for being caring, for being reassuring throughout the years that she's been our Queen, and the legacy that she has left is incredible.
Meanwhile, China's Vice President Wang Qishan will attend Queen Elizabeth's funeral at the invitation of the British government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Saturday. Queen Elizabeth's funeral is to be held at Westminster Abbey on Monday before some 2,000 guests, including visiting heads of state. After the church service, the Queen's coffin will be transported through the historic heart of London on a horse-drawn gun carriage. It will then be taken by hearse to Windsor, where the Queen will be interred alongside her late husband, Prince Philip, who died last year. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that investigators searching through a mass burial site in Ukraine have found evidence that some of the dead were tortured. However, Russian officials have distanced themselves from responsibility. Daniel Rao reports.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke in a video address delivered just hours after the discovery of mass graves at the site near the northeastern city of Izium, which was recently recaptured from Russian forces, began. Thousands of Russian troops fled Izium last weekend after occupying the city and using it as a logistics hub in the Kharkiv region. They left large amounts of ammunition and equipment behind. Zelensky said more than 440 graves have been found at the site, adding the total number of victims was not yet known. He said investigators searching through the mass burial site have found evidence that some of the dead were tortured. Zelensky noted that the United Nations is preparing a team to visit the site and that journalists would be given complete access to the area. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the actions that led to the deaths of the people buried in the mass graves may amount to war crimes.
There can be no reason for what occurred there. At best, it was indiscriminate. At worst, it was intentional. So, two things. One, it's usually important that even as the Ukrainians do everything they can to take back the land that's been seized from them by Russia in this aggression, that at the same time we're all working to build the evidence and document the atrocities that have been committed. And in many instances, these will amount to war crimes, which I think is the appropriate frame through which to look at this. That work is going on. There needs to be accountability.
Russian officials have distanced themselves from responsibility for the site. The Kharkiv region's Russian-installed governor Vitaly Ganchev told Russia's state-run TASS news agency that Ukrainian, not Russian, forces were responsible for civilian casualties in Izium. TASS also quoted a member of Russia's parliament, Alexander Melkovich, claiming that Ukrainian troops had abandoned their dead, so Russian forces buried them. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
Emergency workers and locals in central Italy have begun cleaning up the debris left after floods struck the region on Friday, leaving at least 10 people dead and 4 missing. Mud and debris was strewn across streets in towns in the area. Properties were left severely damaged after the floodwaters receded. In the town of Pianello d'Ostra, the fire department tweeted that dozens of people who were trapped in cars or had clambered up the rooftops or climbed trees to escape rising floodwaters had been brought to safety. Some of the worst flooding struck in and around town of Senigallia, where a river overflowed its banks. The Maldives is usually viewed as an idyllic island paradise, but that's not the whole story. The picturesque beaches are being spoiled by plastic waste, which is also affecting wildlife.
There is a chance for having physical damage, as you can see, with very large plastic particles. When animals get trapped, suffocate because of the being trapped in plastics or eating it, for instance. But it's also, what happens on a much smaller scale when organisms at the very base of the food chain consume very small plastic bits.
On one of the most far-flung islands, Fuvahmulah, locals are battling against plastic pollution by regularly staging cleanup campaigns, removing tons of discarded plastic that wash ashore. Other communities are trying to find new uses for discarded plastics. Old plastic can be shredded and made into useful household items. The message these communities are trying to get out to the world is to stop using one-use-only plastic items. Oktoberfest is back in Germany after a 2-year pandemic-related absence. People are flocking from far and wide to the Bavarian capital, Munich, to get their fill of beer and pork knuckle and the chance to sport a stylish pair of traditional lederhosen.
Crazy how many people here haven't, walking through. It's like, bit of an anxious moment walking through the whole crowd to get there. So once we get sitting down and having a beer, we'll be all right.
Well, there's nothing else like it. The spirit, everyone's so excited to be here. There's just nothing else in the world that's like this. The energy.
The event begins at noon today when Munich's mayor taps the first keg and announces "O Saft is," or it's tapped in the Bavarian dialect to get the party started. However, this year's event will prove more pricey than usual amid rising inflation in Europe. A 1-litre mug of beer at the Oktoberfest will now cost up to €13.8. That's an increase of around 15% compared to 2019. That's the news. Thanks for watching.